The grandfather clock in the Winter's Upper East Side townhouse ticked with cruel precision, each sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. The parlor, usually a place for champagne toasts and polite society gatherings, was now suffocating under the weight of silence. On the polished mahogany table lay a thick prenuptial agreement. Red legal stamps glared from the paper like bloodstains. Henry Winters, once a titan of the shipping industry, sat slumped at the head of the table. His skin had gone ashen, his frame brittle, his tailored suit hanging loose as though it no longer belonged to him. Across from him, his daughter, Isabella Winters, stood rigid. Her sapphire blue eyes shimmered, but not with weakness. There was fury there, and defiance. "Sign it, Bella," Henry croaked, his voice rasping from nights without sleep. "If you don't, we lose the company, the house, everything. This family collapses." Isabella's nails dug into her palms. "So the solution is to auction off your daughter like cargo at a dock." She shot back. "Do you hear yourself, Dad? You're asking me to marry a man I don't love, a man I barely even know, because you can't pay your debts." Her mother sobbed quietly on the sofa, clutching a silk handkerchief that had already soaked through. She said nothing. She couldn't. The truth was too brutal. The door opened, and in walked Ashton Thorne. He was power personified, tall, broad-shouldered, his black Tom Ford suit cut like armor. The soles of his shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor. His face was carved from stone, devastatingly handsome, but it was his eyes storm grey, merciless, that silenced the room. He didn't sit. He removed his leather gloves, deliberately placed them on the table, and finally looked at Isabella. "This isn't a proposal," Ashton said, his voice low, smooth, and dangerous. "It's a transaction." The word hit her like a slap. "What do you want from me?" Isabella demanded, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. A cruel smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I don't want you, Isabella. I want your father to choke on regret. Every morning he'll see you bearing my name and remember his sins. That's the repayment I've been waiting 15 years to collect." Henry's head snapped up, his face pulling. "Ashton, take it out on me. I'll step down. I'll sign anything. Just leave my daughter out of this." "No," Ashton cut him off, his tone a blade. "You don't get to negotiate. I could have destroyed you in the markets, Henry, but this—" He looked back at Isabella, eyes like sharpened glass. "This is better. This is slow. This is pain." Isabella's chest burned. She had seen her father brought low before, but never like this, broken, begging, and something in her refused to kneel. She straightened, shoulders squared, chin lifted. "Fine," she said, her voice slicing through the silence. "I'll sign. But listen carefully, Ashton Thorne. You may force me to take your last name. You will never have my heart." For a fraction of a second, Ashton's expression flickered surprise, maybe even respect, but then it hardened again. He stepped closer, towering over her, until she could feel the cold steel of his presence press against her skin. "Your heart," he murmured, his breath brushing her ear. "I don't want it. I just want your father to bleed every time he looks at you standing beside me. That's all I've ever wanted." Isabella trembled, but her gaze never wavered. With hands that refused to show their shaking, she picked up the pen. Each stroke of her signature felt like carving into her own soul. By the time the ink dried, she felt hollow but not defeated. Ashton gathered the papers, calm and methodical, like closing a deal he'd been planning for years. He slipped them into a leather folder, straightened his jacket, and looked at Henry one last time. From this moment forward, Isabella Winters is my wife in the eyes of the law. Tell me, Henry, how does it feel to trade your daughter's freedom for your empire's corpse? Henry bowed his head, shame and grief etched across his face. Isabella slammed the pen down, her voice ringing like a bell. Enjoy your victory, Ashton. But don't mistake my chains for obedience. You'll find out soon enough what it means to marry someone who refuses to break. Their eyes locked storm against fire, predator against prey, but neither looked away. Then Ashton turned, every inch the ruthless billionaire the tabloids warned about. As the heavy door closed behind him, the room seemed colder, emptier. Isabella stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She had just traded her freedom for her family's survival. The world expected her to crumble, but as she touched the place on her hand where the ring would soon sit, a vow flared inside her. She would not be his victim. She would fight, and the war had only just begun. Saturday morning broke grey and heavy over Manhattan. The sky hung low, a lid of steel over the city. It should have been a day of celebration, but in the St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue, the air felt colder than marble. The church was dressed to impress. Rows of lilies, silk ribbons cascading from the pews, chandeliers polished until they gleamed. Yet the beauty was hollow, like a stage set. There was no warmth, no laughter, only whispers that sounded more like market speculation than wedding chatter. Isabella Winters walked slowly down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's. The gown she wore was perfectioner, strapless creation of ivory silk, hand-stitched lace trailing behind her like spilled snow. But the woman inside the dress was carved from ice, her jaw clenched, her blue eyes fixed straight ahead. Beside her, Henry Winters stumbled slightly, his once proud shoulders hunched with shame. His grip on her hand trembled. "I'm sorry, Bella," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought I could fix this." "I was wrong." She tightened her hold, keeping her chin high so the vultures in the pews wouldn't see her falter. "Don't bow your head, father. We've lost enough already." At the altar, Ashton Thorne stood waiting. He was the picture of ruthless elegance, tall, tuxedo tailored to perfection, grey eyes cool and unreadable. He didn't fidget. He didn't smile. He looked like a man about to sign a merger agreement, not a groom awaiting his bride. The priest's voice echoed, solemn and steady. "Do you, Ashton Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Ashton said. The words were firm, unshaken like a closing statement. "And do you, Isabella Winters, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" For a moment, silence clung to the rafters. Isabella felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on her. Her chest burned, but she forced herself to breathe, to stand tall. "I do," she said, the words bitter on her tongue, as if swallowing glass. When Ashton leaned down for the kiss, his lips brushed hers, lightly, cold, impersonal, a seal on a contract. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. It wasn't affection. It was ownership. In the front pew, Isabella's mother wept openly, her shoulders shaking beneath a shawl. Henry bowed his head so low it nearly touched his knees. The sight cut deeper than any knife. The reception wasn't held in a ballroom filled with music and dancing. Ashton had arranged it inside the top floor of Thorne Industries headquarters, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside, the atmosphere was clinical, like a corporate gala. Crystal glasses clinked. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of champagne. Investors and executives gathered in clusters, murmuring about quarterly reports and stock performance more than the newlyweds. Isabella sat at the edge of it all, a diamond ring on her finger that felt like a shackle. A woman approached her table. She was tall, striking, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that glinted like polished steel. "Mrs. Thorne," she said smoothly, "I'm Regina Voss, CFO of Thorne Industries." Isabella offered a polite smile. "Pleasure." Regina tilted her head, studying her like one might study a competitor. "You're more beautiful than I expected. But beauty doesn't hold much weight in this world. Ashton doesn't marry for love, you know. He marries for leverage. And what makes you think I care?" Isabella shot back. A faint smirk curved Regina's lips. "Because leverage breaks people who don't know how to use it. If you want to survive in his world, learn the rules. Otherwise, you'll be crushed." Before Isabella could reply, Ashton appeared at her side. He slid a hand to the small of her back, the gesture possessive. His grey eyes flicked to Regina. "Enjoying yourself?" "Immensely," Regina said with a cool smile, before drifting away. Isabella turned her face toward Ashton, her voice low and sharp. "You can drag me here, put a ring on my finger, but you'll never own me." His lips brushed close to her ear, his tone quiet, lethal. "Don't confuse pride with freedom. You have neither." She met his gaze, her blue eyes burning like fire against his storm-grey steel. "And don't confuse chains with obedience. You'll never break me." For a heartbeat, the space between them crackled, tension sharper than lightning dot around them. Glasses clinked, deals were whispered, the city glittered beneath the night sky. But for Isabella and Ashton, the wedding was over. The war had just begun. The limousine slid silently through the streets of Midtown, headlights cutting across rain-slick asphalt. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with neon, but inside the car, the silence was suffocating. Isabella sat stiffly, her wedding gown bunched awkwardly against the leather seats, her fingers twisting the edge of her veil. She had braced herself for this moment all day, knowing the night would bring her face to face with the full cruelty of Ashton Thorne. Yet beside her, Ashton sat perfectly composed, scrolling through emails on his phone, as if the evening had been nothing more than a board meeting. Finally, Isabella broke the silence. "You could at least pretend this is a normal wedding night." Ashton's gaze flicked up briefly, his expression unreadable. "Would you rather I lie to you, Isabella? Would you rather I whisper promises of love and devotion when we both know this is nothing more than an arrangement?" Her chest tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "Then what is it? What do you actually want?" He studied her for a long moment, then tucked his phone into his jacket. "Revenge," he said simply. "Your father took everything that mattered to me. Tonight, I take what matters to him." The words landed like a slap. Isabella turned her face away, her reflection trembling in the tinted glass of the window. The limousine pulled into the underground garage of Thorne Tower, Ashton's private skyscraper in Tribeca. The building itself seemed to pierce the clouds, its glass facade glowing like a fortress in the night. Inside the penthouse, the air smelled faintly of leather and expensive scotch. The space was vast, impersonal, steel beams, black marble floors, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a sweeping view of the Manhattan skyline. To anyone else, it would have been breathtaking. To Isabella, it felt like a prison with a view. Your belongings have been moved into the master suite, Ashton said casually, as if announcing a new stock acquisition. The closet has been updated. Your old wardrobe wasn't suitable. She spun toward him, her voice sharp. So, you're not just buying me or erasing me. His gaze was calm, almost bored. No, I'm refining you. A Thorn wife doesn't dress like a winter's charity case. The insult stung, but Isabella stood her ground. You may control what I wear, Ashton, but you'll never control who I am. He stepped closer, his shadow towering over her, his presence magnetic and suffocating all at once. For a moment she thought he would reach for her, force her into the role of bride in ways she dreaded. Instead, his voice dropped, smooth and cold. You misunderstand. I don't want your body tonight. Not yet. This isn't about desire, it's about patience, control. Watching your father break piece by piece, confusion flared inside her. She had been ready for aggression, violation, the worst kind of cruelty. But Ashton turned from her, shrugging off his jacket and tossing it onto a leather chair. I have work to finish, he said, already moving toward his private study. The bedroom is yours. Don't bother locking the door if I wanted to come in. Nothing would stop me. And just like that, he was gone. Isabella stood in the cavernous living room, her gown still heavy around her, her heart hammering. She had expected to be conquered, humiliated. Instead, he had dismissed her entirely, as if she were nothing more than another asset signed into his ledger. Oddly, the dismissal hurt more than the threat would have. Slowly, she climbed the staircase to the master's suite. The room was immaculate, decorated in shades of grey and white, with a king-sized bed that seemed far too large for one person. On the vanity, a velvet box held a diamond necklace, likely another calculated gift, meant more as a brand than a token of affection. She sank onto the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the Empire State Building glowing in the distance. The city roared on, oblivious to the war unfolding in her life. Alone in the silence, Isabella whispered to herself, what kind of man marries a woman only to leave her alone on their wedding night? Somewhere down the hall, she heard the faint click of a laptop opening, the shuffle of papers. Ashton Thorn was in his study, working late, as if nothing about this night mattered. Isabella lay back on the bed, her wedding gown pooling around her like a cage. She closed her eyes, her chest aching with questions she could not silence. Was he truly a monster? Or was there something else behind those storm-grey eyes? Something darker, more complicated than even she could imagine. And why, against all reason, did she want to find out? The first week of married life unfolded like a hostile takeover. Isabella had imagined the penthouse would be silent and empty, that Ashton would stay buried in boardrooms and leave her alone. She was wrong. He was everywhere if not physically, then through his orders, his rules, his invisible grip on every aspect of her life. At breakfast, the dining table stretched long enough to seat a dozen. Ashton sat at one end, reading financial reports on a tablet, while Isabella sat at the other, untouched croissant cooling on her plate. The silence pressed between them like glass. Pass the salt, Ashton said one morning, eyes never leaving the screen. Isabella froze mid. She placed the shaker down in front of him with deliberate force. You could say please. Finally, he looked up. His grey eyes met hers, cool and unblinking. I don't waste words. You don't waste them, she snapped back. You bury them. Like feelings. Like decency. For a split second, something flickered across his expression. Amusement? Irritation? She couldn't tell. Then his gaze dropped back to his tablet, dismissing her. The dismissal infuriated her more than any insult could. The following Friday, Ashton informed her they would attend the Metropolitan Museum's spring gala. "You'll wear the black Versace gown in your closet," he said. Adjusting his cufflinks, Isabella's brows shot up. "Excuse me, since when do you get to dictate what I wear?" "Since you became Mrs. Thorne," he replied smoothly. "Appearances matter. My wife doesn't just represent herself. She represents me." She crossed her arms, fire in her eyes. "I'm not your puppet." He finally looked at her fully, eyes narrowing just slightly. For a tense moment, silence filled the space, heavy as a storm about to break. Then his lips curved into the faintest smirk. "Good," he said softly. "Puppets are boring." The words should have insulted her. Instead, they unsettled her, as though he saw her defiance as fuel rather than resistance. The gala itself glittered with Manhattan's elite. Marble halls echoed with laughter, champagne flowed, diamonds sparkled under chandeliers. Isabella walked beside Ashton, head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her. The winter's girl, married for survival. At the bar, Victor Coleman, a rival CEO with a smile like a blade, raised his glass mockingly. "So this is the winter's girl," he sneered. "Ashton, I didn't know you were into charity cases." Laughter rippled around them. Isabella's chest tightened, but before she could fire back, Ashton's arm slid firmly around her waist. His voice was calm, lethal. "Careful, Coleman. You're talking about my wife. I don't tolerate disrespect toward what's mine." The laughter died instantly. Coleman's smirk faltered. He muttered something under his breath and retreated into the crowd. Isabella's heart pounded. She turned to Ashton. Fury and disbelief tangled in her chest. "You didn't have to do that." His gaze swept over her, unreadable. "Yes, I did." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't pretend you were protecting me. You were protecting your image." Ashton's lips twitched, but not into a smile. "Maybe, or maybe I simply don't like anyone underestimating what belongs to me." The word "belongs" burned in her ears. She spun away, determined not to let his words burrow under her skin. But the echo of his hand at her waist lingered, far longer than she wanted. Back at the penthouse, the storm finally broke. "You don't get to call me yours in public and collateral in private." Isabella flared as soon as the door closed behind them. "You can't humiliate me at home and then play the gallant husband for an audience." Ashton loosened his tie, his expression cool as ice. "You think I care what they believe? Let them speculate. What matters is they now know you stand under my protection." "I don't need your protection," she spat. Double quotes, "Yes, you do," he said, voice low, dangerous. "Because in this city, the wolves circle fast. And you, Isabel, you walked into the den when you signed that contract." Her pulse quickened, but she refused to look away. "Then maybe I'll learn to bite." For the first time, Ashton's smirk was genuine, dangerous, almost admiring. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the space between them. "Careful," he murmured. "You might find you enjoy the game more than you expect." Isabella's breath caught, anger and something unnameable colliding inside her. She forced herself to step back, spine straight. "This isn't a game," she whispered. His eyes locked on hers, storm grey and relentless. "No," he agreed softly. "It's war. That night, lying awake in the cavernous master suite, Isabella stared at the ceiling, her heart still racing. The gala, his defense, his words, they gnawed at her. She hated him, despised him, and yet, why did her chest tighten every time his hand touched her waist? Why did his words linger, haunting her long after he left the room? She closed her eyes, fists clenched in the sheets. She would not break. She would not let him win. But deep down, she knew, the storm had only just begun. The invitation had been embossed in gold, delivered by courier, and signed by one of Manhattan's most powerful families. A charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, a place where fortunes were flaunted as easily as diamonds. For Isabella, it was just another cage. She had learned quickly that being Ashton Thorne's wife meant showing up at events where she was, nothing more than a prop. But this night, she promised herself she would not wilt under the spotlight. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, champagne flutes, and the hum of violins. Isabella entered on Ashton's arm, wearing a sleek navy gown that hugged her figure like liquid silk. Her chin was high, her expression composed, but inside, her pulse thundered. Whispers followed her like smoke. That's the Winters girl, married into power. She traded a sinking ship for the Thorne Empire. She ignored them. Or at least, she tried. At the far end of the room, a woman in a crimson gown glided forward. Her name was Vivian Blackwood, the wife of a rival hedge fund magnate. Vivian had the kind of smile that cut. Mrs. Thorne, Vivian purred, her voice laced with venom. You look stunning tonight. Tell me, what's it like to marry your way out of bankruptcy? A ripple of cruel laughter spread through the nearby guests. Isabella's throat tightened, but she steadied herself. She refused to let them see her break. At least I didn't marry for headlines, she replied coolly. Some of us prefer substance over spectacle. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Vivian's eyes narrowed, her painted lips twisting. Careful, darling. In this city, reputation is everything, and you have none. Isabella felt the sting, but before she could answer, a shadow loomed beside her. Ashton, he had approached so silently she hadn't noticed. But now his hands slid to the small of her back, firm and possessive. His grey eyes locked on Vivian, his voice smooth as steel. Funny, he said, coming from someone whose husband is currently begging me for an extension on his credit line. Vivian's smirk faltered. Murmurs rippled outward like shockwaves. Ashton didn't stop. Let me make this perfectly clear, he continued, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. Anyone who disrespects my wife disrespects me. And that is a mistake no one in this city survives twice. Silence fell. Vivian's face drained of colour. She stammered some excuse and disappeared into the crowd. For a moment the entire ballroom seemed frozen. Then the chatter resumed, louder, more nervous than before. Cameras flashed. Deals shifted. The balance of power had been redrawn in a single, cutting remark. Isabella stood stunned, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to Ashton, her voice barely a whisper. You didn't have to do that. His gaze settled on her, unreadable, but there was no cold detachment in his eyes now. There was fire. Yes, he said simply. I did. She swallowed hard. Don't twist this into chivalry. You didn't defend me, you defended your image. His mouth curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Maybe, or maybe I don't tolerate anyone underestimating what's mine. The word mine burned like a brand. She should have been furious, she was furious, but her chest betrayed her with an ache she didn't understand. Back in the limousine, the city lights flickered across the glass, painting their faces in gold and shadow. Isabella sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice sharp. "Why go that far? You humiliate me at home, then parade as my protector in public. Which one is real, Ashton?" He turned his head, his grey eyes locking on hers. For once, there was no smirk, no shield of arrogance. Only a flicker of something raw, something human. "Both," he said quietly. "The world doesn't need to know the difference." Her heart twisted. She hated his answer. She hated that it wasn't an answer at all. That night, Isabella paced the master suite, her gown abandoned on the chair. She replayed the scene again and again, Vivian's insult, the crowd's laughter, Ashton's defense. She told herself it was all strategy. He had protected his brand, his reputation. She was a pawn in his war. And yet, the way he had stepped forward, the way his voice had cut through the room with deadly certainty, the way his hand had steadied her back, grounding her in the moment she thought she might collapse. She pressed a hand to her chest, furious at herself for feeling the warmth that lingered there. "Don't be stupid," she whispered into the empty room. "He doesn't care. He'll never care." But deep down, in the quiet place she didn't dare admit aloud, Isabella knew the truth. Something inside her had shifted tonight, and that terrified her more than his cruelty ever had. The penthouse was quiet that night, too quiet. Isabella had returned from the Plaza Gala hours earlier, but her mind refused to rest. She lay in the master suite, staring at the city lights shimmering beyond the windows, replaying every detail of Ashton's words. "Anyone who disrespects my wife disrespects me." She pressed a pillow against her chest, willing herself to forget the strange warmth those words had sparked. But the harder she tried, the more her thoughts circled back to one truth. Ashton, Fawn was not a man who did anything without a reason, and reasons could be uncovered when the clock struck midnight. Isabella slipped from the bed and padded down the hallway. A sliver of light glowed under the door of Ashton's private study. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Ashton stood by the desk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jaw tight, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice her at first. 15 years, and Winters still breathes free, he said, his voice sharp as glass. Her death was never avenged. His negligence killed her. That's why this marriage matters. Every day he sees his daughter wearing my name, he remembers. That's justice. Isabella froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her death. Ashton turned then, sensing her presence. His storm-grey eyes darkened. He ended the call slowly, sliding the phone into his pocket. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Isabella stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "Who were you talking about? Whose death?" He turned his back to her, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows as though the city could swallow his secrets. "This isn't a conversation for tonight. Don't you dare dismiss me," she snapped. "You dragged me into this nightmare of a marriage. I deserve to know why." His hands clenched at his sides. For a long moment, silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Then he turned, his face carved in shadow. "My sister," Ashton said, voice low and rough. "Her name was Lily, 16 years old. She died in an accident at one of your father's shipping docks." The words hit Isabella like a thunderclap. "No." He stepped closer, each word a blade. The rig collapsed. faulty equipment. Winter's shipping cut corners on safety, and when she died, your father made sure the investigation went away. OSHA fines disappeared. The DA dropped charges. He buried the truth. While I buried her, Isabella staggered back, her hand clutching the edge of the desk for support. My father, he would never. He did, Ashton snarled. For the first time, his composure cracked, fury blazing raw in his eyes. I stood in the rain that night, holding what was left of my family, while Winters walked away untouched. Every dollar in your world was bought with her blood. Do you understand now? You're not my wife. You're leverage. You're the living reminder of what he stole. Tears pricked Isabella's eyes, but she shook her head violently. I was a child, Ashton. I didn't choose any of this. You're punishing the wrong person. His breath came sharp, uneven. For a moment, she thought he might lash out. Instead, he leaned close, his voice a guttural whisper. Your father doesn't deserve to lose money. He deserves to lose sleep. And nothing costs more than watching his daughter shackled to the man who hates him most. Her chest ached, torn between fury and heartbreak. She wanted to scream, to strike him, to demand proof. But the pain in his voice, raw and ragged, was too real to dismiss. Slowly, she whispered, revenge won't bring her back. It won't heal you. It'll hollow you until there's nothing left. His jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered, grief leaking through the cracks. Then, as quickly as it came, he slammed the door shut inside himself. Go to bed, Isabella, he said coldly. Tomorrow we face the press together. Her lips trembled. I don't even know who you are anymore. You know enough, he replied. She turned and fled the study, her tears blurring the glitter of the Manhattan skyline. But just before she closed the door behind her, she glanced back. Ashton stood alone at the window, his shoulders bowed, his hand pressed to the glass as though he were holding himself up. For once, he didn't look like a ruthless CEO. He looked like a man haunted by a ghost he could never outrun, and that terrified her more than his cruelty ever had. The call came just after dawn. Isabella was still curled in the vast, cold expanse of the master suite, her eyes raw from a night without sleep. When her phone buzzed, she fumbled to answer, then froze at the sound of her mother's trembling voice. Bella, it's your father. He collapsed. Her heart stopped. Collapsed. Where is he? Lenox Hill Hospital. I see you, the doctors. They don't know if he'll. Her mother's words dissolved into sobs. Isabella didn't wait. She threw on the first coat she could find, bolted from the penthouse, and hailed a cab with shaking hands. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. Isabella rushed down the corridor, heels clicking frantically against the tile. At the ICU doors, she saw her father through the glass pal, tubes running from his body, machines beeping in fragile rhythm. Her mother sat slumped in a chair, face buried in her hands. Dad, Isabella whispered, pressing a hand to the glass as tears blurred her vision. Mrs. Thorne. A voice interrupted. A doctor approached, his tone clinical but not unkind. Your father suffered a cardiac arrest. Years of stress, compounded by financial strain. He's stable for now, but the next 48 hours are critical. The words carved into her chest. She turned, clutching her mother, fighting back a sob. We can't lose him. Not like this. Behind her, a presence loomed. She didn't need to look to know. Ashton had arrived. He strode into the hallway, immaculately dressed even at this ungodly hour, his expression cold as marble. His grey eyes flicked from Henry's frail body to Isabella's tear-streaked face. "Why are you here?" Isabella demanded, her voice raw. "To gloat. To watch him suffer more." "I came because the press will sniff this out within hours," Ashton said evenly. "If Winter's shipping's founder dies, markets will react. I need to manage the fallout." Isabella stared at him in disbelief. "Fallout? He's not a stock Ashen. He's my father." He didn't flinch. "He's also the man who killed my sister." The corridor fell silent, except for the steady beep of Henry's monitors. Isabella's hands shook. "Do you have so much hatred in you that you can't even see a dying man as human?" Something flickered in his eyes, then regret, but his voice stayed icy. "Don't mistake hesitation for forgiveness. I won't rewrite history because he's weak." "Then don't," Isabella snapped, her voice breaking. "But if you still have a shred of humanity left, at least help me save what's left of my family's company. Don't let him die knowing everything he built has collapsed." Her plea hung in the sterile air. For the first time, Ashton hesitated. His jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "I said no," he growled, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Isabella stepped closer, her tears shining like glass. "If you want me as your wife, then prove you're more than the monster you pretend to be. Help me, Ashton, please." The word please cracked something in him. For a moment, he saw not Henry Winters's daughter, but a woman standing in the ruins of her world, begging for mercy she didn't deserve to need. Ashton tore his gaze away, running a hand over his face as though dragging himself back behind the mask. "I can't," he said at last. "Not yet." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing like thunder in the hall. Hours later, Isabella sat by her father's bedside, clutching his limp hand. Her mother dozed fitfully in the corner. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I don't care about the company. I just need you to fight. Please. Don't leave me with him. Don't leave me alone." Her father's eyelids fluttered, just barely. His lips parted, and a single word rasped out, "Sorry." Isabella's tears fell hot onto his sheets. She pressed his hand to her cheek. "No, don't apologize. Just stay. Please stay." Behind her, the door opened again. She turned, expecting a nurse. It was Ashton. He stood in the doorway, his expression torn between ice and fire. His eyes flicked to Henry, then back to her. For once, he looked like he didn't know what to say. Isabella rose to her feet, fury and anguish colliding inside her. "If you came back to watch him die, I swear," Ashton cut her off, his voice low but rough around the edges. "I came back because I can't stop thinking about what you said, about not being a monster." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, his hand brushing briefly against hers, before he seemed to think better of it. "I don't forgive him. I never will. But maybe helping you isn't about him. Maybe it's about you." For the first time since their marriage began, his words carried no arrogance, no calculation, only conflict. Isabella stared at him, heart hammering, torn between hate and something far more dangerous. The machines beside Henry beeped steadily, fragile proof of life. And in that "I see you," Isabella realized the war between them had shifted. It was no longer just about revenge. It was about whether Ashton Thorne could still be saved from himself. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the penthouse that night, streaks of water racing down like veins of silver. The city below shimmered in neon, but inside the Thorn Tower, the silence was heavy. Restless. Isabella had returned from the hospital past midnight. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, but her mind refused to shut down. Every beat of her father's heart monitor still echoed in her ears. Every word Ashton had said in the ICU corridor replayed itself endlessly. She sat curled on the edge of the bed, still in her coat, staring out into the storm. Her body shook with the kind of fatigue that went bone-deep by the time she finally slipped under the covers. A fever was already blooming in her skin. When Ashton came home, hours later, the lights in the bedroom were dim, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. He had expected her to be awake, pacing, defiant. Instead, he found Isabella tangled in the sheets. Her breathing shallow, her cheeks flushed with heat. He stopped dead in the doorway. For years, Ashton had trained himself to see Isabella as a weapon, a symbol, a punishment. But now, seeing her fragile, trembling in sleep, he felt a jolt of something he hadn't allowed himself in 15 years, fear, crossing the room. He pressed the back of his hand against her forehead. The fever burned against his skin. "Damn it, Isabella," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He could face down corporate sharks, hostile takeovers, the bloodiest mergers on Wall Street, but not this. Not the sight of her vulnerable, helpless. She stirred at his touch, mumbling in delirium. "Dad, don't leave me. Please." The words struck him like a blade. He had wanted her father to suffer, to feel the sharp edge of loss every day. But he hadn't expected her to carry that weight. Hadn't realized the revenge he craved was cutting through her as much as it cut through Henry Winters. He cursed under his breath, then picked her up gently, cradling her against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, her head lolling against his shoulder. He carried her down the hall into the guest suite, where the air was cooler, quieter. He laid her carefully on the bed, then fetched a bowl of ice water and a clean towel. His movements were efficient. Practiced it, his hands shook as he wrung out the cloth and pressed it to her forehead. Her lips parted, whispering through the fever haze. "Why are you being kind to me?" Ashton froze. For a long moment, he didn't answer, because he didn't know. Finally, his voice came low, hoarse. "Because I don't know how not to." The night stretched long. He sat by her bedside, trading warm cloths for cold ones, watching the fever rise and fall. Every time she stirred, every time she whimpered his name or her father's, something inside him twisted. He remembered Lily, his sister's pale face, her laughter that had once filled their small apartment, the way she'd braided flowers into his hair when he was only a boy. He remembered holding her hand on that dock, the crushing weight of steel beams, the blood, the silence that followed. For years, that memory had hardened him, forged him into steel. But tonight, with Isabella's hand clutching weakly at his sleeve, steel felt like nothing but a brittle shield. He whispered, more to himself than to her, "What the hell are you doing to me, Isabella?" When morning came, Isabella's fever broke. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, lashes damp, her throat dry. The first thing she saw was Ashton, slumped in a chair by her bed, his tie undone, his head bowed in exhaustion. She blinked, disoriented. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, that the ruthless man she'd married couldn't possibly be the same one sitting vigil by her bedside. Her voice cracked. "You stayed." Ashton stirred, lifting his head. His storm-grey eyes met hers, and for once there was no coldness there. Only relief raw, unguarded. You scared the hell out of me, he admitted, his voice rough. Don't do it again. She almost laughed, though her throat burned. Since when do you care if I live or die? The silence stretched between them. Ashton leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze locked on hers. Since last night, he said quietly, or maybe since the day you walked into that boardroom with fire in your eyes and told me, I'd never have your heart. Her breath caught. The words felt too close, too dangerous. She wanted to dismiss them, to remind him of the cruelty he'd shown her, of the reasons she could never forgive him. But lying there, weak and fragile, she couldn't ignore the tenderness in his eyes. Her lips parted. You can't keep confusing me like this. One moment you're a monster, the next I'm what? He pressed, leaning closer. Her eyes shimmered. The next you're human. And that scares me more than anything. His jaw clenched, as though the truth of her words struck him too deep. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside had calmed, but inside the room, their silence was louder than thunder. Finally, Ashton straightened, pulling his mask back into place, though his eyes betrayed the battle raging within. Rest. You'll need your strength. He stood, heading for the door. But just as he reached it, Isabella's voice stopped him. Ashton, he turned. Her eyes were soft, vulnerable, filled with something she hadn't dared let herself feel before. Thank you. For a heartbeat, the ruthless CEO disappeared. He was just a man, standing in the doorway, caught between vengeance and something he no longer knew how to name. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, then left the room, and Isabella lay there, heart pounding, realizing the most terrifying truth of all. She was starting to fall for the man she had sworn to hate. The city never truly slept, but that night New York seemed restless. News of Henry Winters's collapse had leaked to the press despite Ashton's attempts to contain it. Paparazzi swarmed the hospital, tabloids churned out headlines, and whispers about Winters Shipping's impending demise flooded Wall Street. For Isabella, the pressure was suffocating. She spent her days shuttling between the hospital and the penthouse, trying to hold her family together, trying to keep herself from unraveling. Yet somewhere deep inside, something had changed. Ashton's vigil during her fever had left a mark she couldn't erase, but with every flicker of tenderness came the reminder, he still hates my father. He still married me for revenge. The contradiction gnawed at her until she couldn't tell if she was drowning or being pulled deeper by choice. The gala at the Waldorf Astoria was supposed to be a distraction, a chance for Ashton to steady the markets, to prove the Thorne Empire remained untouchable. Isabella didn't want to go, but Ashton insisted. You're my wife, he told her firmly as he fastened his cufflinks. Tonight, you stand with me. That's not optional. She had glared at him, but in the end, she followed. She always did. And that frightened her more than anything. The ballroom was alive with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes, a theatre of wealth and power. Ashton's hand rested at the small of her back as they moved through the crowd, his touch steady, grounding, claiming. Yet beneath the glitter, Isabella sensed una sed. Conversations hushed when Ashton passed. Eyes lingered too long. The tension wasn't just social, it was predatory. And she was right. It happened in an instant. As they stepped onto the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom, a man broke from the crowd. Sharp suit, calm face, but his hand moved too quickly inside his jacket. Isabella's breath caught. Ashton, she cried, The gun glinted under the chandelier. Time seemed to fracture. The man raised his arm, aiming straight for Isabella. Ashton moved before she could process, shoving her hard against the marble column. The shot cracked like thunder, the sound ricocheting off crystal and stone. Glass shattered. Guests screamed. Chaos erupted. Ashton. Isabella shrieked. He grunted, staggering back. Blood bloomed across the sleeve of his suit, spreading dark and fast. The gunman tried again, but Ashton lunged, slamming the attacker into the railing. They struggled, the weapon twisting between them. The crowd scattered in panic, some filming, others fleeing. Security rushed in to slow. Another shot rang out. The gunman crumpled, his own bullet tearing through him as Ashton wrenched the weapon free. The man collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Ashton staggered, one hand gripping the railing, the other clutching his bleeding arm. His eyes swept the chaos, then locked on Isabella, terrified, trembling, tears streaking her face. And in that moment, everything else, the guests, the flashing cameras, the blood pooling on marble, faded. Ashton, she choked, rushing to him, grabbing his arm. You're bleeding, God. You're bleeding so much. He caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly steady despite the pain. His storm-grey eyes burned into hers, fierce and raw. You're safe, he said hoarsely. That's all that matters. Her heart shattered. She had expected him to shield his empire, his image, his vengeance. Instead, he had chosen her. He had taken the bullet meant for her. Why? She whispered, voice breaking. Why would you do this? Blood dripped down his hand, but he pulled her closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. His voice cracked, not with pain, but with truth. Because somewhere along the way, Isabella, you stopped being my weapon. You became my world. The words gutted her. She wanted to deny them, to call them manipulation. But looking into his eyes, stormy, desperate, unguarded, she saw no deception. She saw a man stripped bare, confessing what he had fought against since the day they met. And then came the twist as security swarmed. As EMTs pushed through the chaos, Ashton's phone buzzed in his pocket. Isabella fumbled to answer when he pressed it into her hand. A distorted voice hissed through the line. Tell Thorne this is only the beginning. He took something from us years ago. Tonight was just a warning. Next time, we don't miss. The call ended. Isabella's blood ran cold. This hadn't been random. Ashton wasn't the only one living with ghosts of the past. As EMTs tried to pull him onto a stretcher, Ashton's eyes locked on hers, the weight of that threat heavy between them. They're coming for you, too, he rasped. This isn't about Winters anymore. It's about me, and I won't let them touch you. She clutched his hand as they wheeled him away, her tears falling onto his bloodied suit. Don't you dare leave me, Ashton. Don't you dare, for the first time. She realized the terrifying truth. She didn't just want him to live because of duty or survival. She wanted him to live because somewhere in the wreckage of revenge and hatred, she had fallen in love with him. That night at the hospital, while surgeons worked on Ashton, Isabella sat in the waiting room, her mind racing. The words of the caller echoed in her skull. This is only the beginning. She thought she had been trapped in Ashton's war of revenge. But now she understood. They were both pawns in a larger game, one neither of them had seen coming. And for the first time, Isabella wasn't afraid of Ashton Thorne. She was afraid of losing him. The hospital was a blur of white coats, rushing footsteps, and the sterile sting of antiseptic. Isabella sat hunched in the waiting room, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Time crawled, each second dragging like an eternity. Through the glass doors of the operating theatre, she could see shadows moving, hear muffled commands, the steady beep of machines. Every sound was a lifeline and a threat. Please, she prayed silently, her tears falling unchecked. Don't let him die. Don't take him from me now. Not when I finally... The realization slammed into her like a wave. She loved him. She had fought it, denied it, cursed it, but when Ashton had thrown himself in front of that bullet, the truth had shattered through every wall she built. He wasn't just her captor, her tormentor, her reluctant protector. He was her heart. Hours later, the surgeon finally emerged, removing his mask. Isabella shot to her feet. He's alive, the doctor said. The bullet missed his lung by centimeters. We repaired the damage, stopped the bleeding. He's stable now, but he'll need time to recover. Relief broke over Isabella like sunlight. Her knees nearly gave out, and she had to clutch the wall to steady herself. Can I see him? She whispered. The doctor nodded. Ashton lay pale against the crisp hospital sheets, monitors beeping steadily at his side. His arm was bandaged, an IV line threading into his vein. He looked fragile in a way Isabella had never seen, like the armor had finally cracked. She pulled a chair close, slipping her hand into his. His fingers twitched weakly, curling around hers. His eyelids fluttered open, storm-grey eyes clouded but still sharp. You're here, he rasped. Of course, I'm here, Isabella said, her voice breaking. Where else would I be? He gave a ghost of a smirk. You could have run. This was your chance. Her tears spilled faster. Don't joke about that. You nearly died. His gaze softened, more than she'd ever seen. And I'd do it again. 1,000 times. Because you, he broke off, coughing weakly, but his grip on her hand tightened. Because you're no longer a reminder of my revenge. You're the reason I want to live. Her chest ached, the weight of his confession almost unbearable. She pressed her forehead to his, closing her eyes. You idiot. You waited until you were half dead to tell me. A shaky laugh escaped him, then turned into a groan of pain. Isabella hushed him quickly. Don't move. Just rest. I'll be here. In the days that followed, Ashton's recovery was slow but steady. Isabella barely left his side, helping with his medication, coaxing him to eat. Sitting through endless meetings with lawyers and security teams investigating the attack. And through it all, she began to see the man beneath the steel mask. Not just the ruthless CEO, but the brother who had once loved his sister so fiercely that her loss had carved him hollow. The man who had built an empire out of vengeance, only to discover it couldn't heal him. One evening, as twilight bled across the skyline outside his hospital window, Ashton turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. I've been wrong, Isabella, he said. About so much. About revenge. About your father. About us. Holding on to hate didn't bring Lily back. It only destroyed me and nearly destroyed you. Her throat tightened. Ashton. He squeezed her hand, eyes glistening. I can't change the past, but I can choose the future, and I want it with you. If you'll still have me. Her tears spilled freely now, but this time they were tears of release. She leaned forward, kissing him gently, her lips trembling against his. You already have me, she whispered. You've had me for longer than I wanted to admit. Weeks later, the Winters family gathered at Henry's bedside. He had survived his cardiac arrest, but remained weak, his once proud frame diminished. He looked at Ashton with wary eyes, guilt etched deep in his face. But Ashton did something no one expected. He reached out and shook Henry's hand. "For years, I wanted you to suffer," Ashton said, voice steady. "But carrying that hate nearly killed me. It's time I let it go. For Isabella, for Lily, for all of us." Henry's lips trembled, and for the first time in decades, tears filled his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "more sorry than words can ever cover." Ashton gave a single nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was peace. And for Isabella, that was enough. The press spun the story of the shooting for weeks, speculating about corporate rivals, shadowy enemies, hidden vendettas. But inside the Thorne penthouse, none of it mattered. One evening, long after Ashton had returned home, Isabella stood with him on the balcony overlooking Manhattan. The city sprawled beneath them, alive and endless. The wind tugged at her hair, as Ashton slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We've both been through hell," he murmured, "but maybe we get to start over, not as a contract, not as revenge, but as us." She rested her head against his shoulder, her heart steady for the first time in years. "Then let's build something new." Together, he kissed her temple softly. Together, below them, the city glittered like 1,000 stars. The ghosts of the past were still their whispers of vengeance. Shadows of enemies yet unseen, but for the first time, Isabella and Ashton faced the future not as adversaries, but as partners. And in the quiet of that balcony, with the storm finally behind them, they found the beginning of a love neither had ever dared to believe in. A new beginning. 5 years later, Central Park in spring was alive with color. Cherry blossoms fluttered. Through the air like pale pink snow, laughter carried on the breeze, and the lake shimmered under the warm sunlight. On a checkered blanket spread across the grass, Isabella Thorne sat cross-legged, watching her daughter chase bubbles across the lawn. Little Lily Rose Thorne, 4 years old, with curls the color of chestnuts and storm-gray eyes that mirrored. Her father's giggled as the bubbles burst on her tiny hands. The name had been Isabella's, Idea Lily, in honor of Ashton's sister. At first, Ashton had resisted, haunted by the past. But the first time he'd held the baby in his arms, her tiny fist curling round his finger, the weight of grief had finally lifted. The name no longer hurt. It healed. Isabella felt the grass tickle her bare ankles, her heart full. Her father, Henry, was seated on a bench nearby, still frail but alive, tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks. Her mother sat beside him, her hand wrapped around his, their bond restored after so much fracture. The Winters family had survived. Behind her, footsteps approached. Isabella turned to see Ashton, tall and composed in his navy suit, but with his tie loosened and his shoes dusted with grass from chasing Lily earlier. He carried 2 coffees, and that familiar smirk that had once infuriated her and now made her heart race. Board meeting ended early. Isabella teased, fired half the room for being boring, he said dryly, handing her a cup. Then, softer, but really, I just wanted to be here. He sat beside her, his arms sliding round her waist. She leaned into him, savoring the warmth of his body against hers. Once, she had thought him incapable of such simple gestures. Now, she knew better. Together, they watched Lily tumble onto the blanket, squealing with laughter. Ashton scooped her up effortlessly, tickling her until she shrieked with joy. Isabella's chest ached with a love so deep it was almost painful. "Who would have thought?" Isabella murmured, her voice quiet. "The girl forced into marriage with the ruthless CEO. And now look at us." Ashton met her gaze, grey eyes, gentler than she'd ever imagined they could be. It was never supposed to end this way, he admitted, but thank God it did. She smiled, brushing her lips against his. You've changed, Ashton Thorne. Or maybe, he countered softly, I just finally found the part of me I thought was gone. His eyes shifted toward Lily, who had fallen asleep curled in his arms. She gave me that. You gave me that. Isabella's hand slipped into his, and you gave me something too. Not the chains I once feared, but freedom, to love, to hope. They kissed then, tender and unhurried, as the cherry blossoms rained gently around them. The city roared beyond the park, the skyscrapers, the noise, the endless tide of ambition. But here, in their small circle of peace, Ashton and Isabella had carved out something stronger than power, stronger than vengeance. They had carved out family, and for the first time both believed in forever.